Awaken your shadow. The truth sets some people free. It offends everyone else. By Seth, the Red Neo, Cherapak.
Chapter 11. Your Divine Right to Transcendence. I'm kneeling on the floor, staring at the wall. Like the spider in the window, I wish that I could speak. Is there fantasy in refuge? God in politicians? Should I turn on my religion? These demons in my head tell me to. Dream Theatre. Voices. Lyrics by John Petrucci. In the moment of true humility, you become transparent, and God's wisdom shines through you. Seth Cherapak. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Enlightenment is when the mind finally admits what the heart knew all along. Seth Cherapak. Perfection is static, only grace can move. Czesław Miłosz. Part 1. Foundations of the Transcendent Self.
Your transcendent self is your ambassador. It is the part of you that lives beyond the gravity of the matrix and above the timeline of your thoughts, your identity, your personal story. It even transcends the vibration of your nervous system. It stands as the bridge between heaven and earth, between time and eternity, between your human self and your divine source. It does not escape the world, but moves through it with the calm authority of one who knows they are not from it. Where your guardian, trailblazer, ruler, lover, messenger, and intuitive selves govern the visible layers of your being, the transcendent self governs the invisible field that contains them all. It is the awareness that watches the watcher, the stillness beneath all motion, the clarity that remains when every illusion has burned away. Lucifer fears this self more than any other, for it reveals the one thing his empire cannot counterfeit, true transcendence. Every other shadow in this book can be mistaken for light, but the transcendent self is where light ceases to be a metaphor and becomes the reality of your being. Lucifer cannot extinguish this light, so he does what he always does. He counterfeits it. His imitation is called perfectionism. It is the counterfeit of transcendence, the false crown of the spiritually proud. Perfectionism is the inability to live in a world where good and evil, order and chaos, spirit and flesh coexist. It is the fracture of godliness into sterile categories, the obsession with separating the pure from the impure until love itself is lost in the division. Transcendence is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming whole. Perfectionism pretends to seek wholeness by cutting life in half. It wants only the light, never the shadow, only clarity, never confusion, only holiness, never humanity. But God does not divide what He created to be one. As we find in the Old Testament book of Isaiah 45:7, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. The perfectionist mind cannot bear this mystery. It wants a tidy universe where all paradox is dissolved and every loose thread neatly trimmed. But transcendence requires you to live inside the tension without splitting it. It asks you to see that heaven and earth, order and chaos, good and evil, are not enemies. They are the polarities through which God's vibration creates movement. The Hermetic text, the Kabbalion, says, everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. It also says nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Polarity describes this spectrum of experience, light and dark, order and chaos, spirit and flesh. Vibration reveals how a transcendent consciousness moves along that spectrum. Perfectionism tries to freeze this movement at one pole, clinging to light while denying shadow, order while despising chaos. Transcendence aligns with the divine principle of vibration. It accepts that tension is not a sign that something has gone wrong, but a sign that something is alive and in motion. The transcendent self lives in this divine dissonance, trusting that grace, not control, brings harmony. In modern spirituality, transcendence is often confused with enlightenment. I rarely use that word anymore because the term has been hijacked by those who mistake awakening for completion. The owl awakening brings clarity of perception, cutting through survival illusions. The serpent awakening brings emotional and spiritual depth, reconnecting you to divine wisdom through your body. Both are real and necessary, but both are incomplete without the fire of the phoenix, the awakening that consumes pride and resurrects humility. The phoenix is the true image of transcendence, awareness rising from the ashes of the ego. True transcendence is not the absence of self, but the mastery of self. It is not the rejection of thought, emotion, or experience, but the realization that these are not who you are. As the Katha Upanishad declares, the self is not born, nor does it die. It is not slain when the body is slain. Awareness is higher than whatever it observes. This awareness is the domain of the transcendent self. It allows you to stand above the game board of your life and see the pieces for what they are, temporary, instructive, and subject to your higher will. It allows you to move not in reaction to fear, pain, or desire, but in alignment with divine purpose. The infamous philosopher René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." But he stopped one question too soon. Who is it that observes the thinking? The transcendent self lives in that unanswered question. Thought is not your proof of existence. Awareness is. As the Tao Te Ching says, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The moment you name yourself by your thoughts, you fall from the unnameable awareness that contains them. The transcendent self is the nameless center that watches thought rise and fall like waves on an infinite ocean. This is the state from which Jesus resisted the 3 temptations in the wilderness, which we read about in Matthew 4:4-10. Each temptation mirrored one of the 3 spiritual awakenings introduced and explained in chapter 3. First came the temptation of the survival level. Command that these stones be made bread. This was the invitation to use spiritual power to erase physical discomfort, to turn divine authority into a vending machine for immediate relief. Second came the temptation of the emotional level. Throw yourself down, for it is written, He shall give His angels charge over you. This was the invitation to turn God into a stuntman for the ego, to demand a dramatic rescue as proof of being favored, chosen, special. Third came the temptation of the spiritual level, when the devil took Jesus to the top of the highest mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and said, "All these kingdoms I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." This was the temptation to use enlightenment itself as a means of domination, to trade worship of God for spiritual and worldly power. It is no coincidence that this temptation came from the top of a mountain, for this is the place in our spiritual journey when we are most vulnerable to being led astray by Lucifer's sin of pride. Jesus answered each temptation not with pride, argument, or performance, but with surrender. To the physical temptation, he said, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." To the emotional temptation, he said, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." To the spiritual temptation, he said, "You shall worship the Lord your God, and Him only shall you serve." This is transcendence in practice. Jesus refused to use his divine power to serve the ego at any level, physical, emotional, or spiritual. Lucifer, the false light, cannot bear this posture because he knows surrender is the doorway to true transcendence. His gospel is pride disguised as perfection, promising you godlike purity while quietly severing you from grace. It whispers, "You will be like God," but it means to say, "You will replace him." Perfectionism is the echo of that lie. It seduces the spiritual seeker into believing that if they could just purify their thoughts, control their emotions, and master their body, they would be divine. But divinity cannot be achieved by control. As the Dhammapada says, "Not by hatred is hatred appeased, but by love alone." Perfection is attained not through control, but through sacred surrender. Transcendence begins when you stop trying to be God and allow God to move through you. When you stop playing both sides of the board, the sinner and the saint, and rise above them. From that altitude, you can see that your so-called imperfections are not flaws in the design, but frequencies in the divine symphony. Perfectionism wants a silent song, notes so pure they never touch dissonance. Transcendence wants the living melody, notes that bend, resolve, and create movement. As the Tao Te Ching teaches, he who knows harmony becomes the constant. Knowing the constant, he knows the eternal. This is why perfectionism always leads to paralysis. It freezes you at the threshold of every choice, terrified of error. Transcendence moves. It acts from higher awareness even when understanding is incomplete. It chooses function over meaning, obedience over analysis. The perfectionist says, "I must understand everything before I move." The transcendent says, "I move because I trust." Consider the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Robert Louis Stevenson, a Christian struggling with the duality of good and evil, imagined a man who sought to separate his moral and immoral selves. In his quest for purity, Dr. Jekyll created his opposite. What he exiled became autonomous. Hyde was not born from evil, but from Jekyll's refusal to integrate it. So it is with the perfectionist. In striving to become all light, he feeds the darkness he denies. The more he condemns his shadow, the stronger it grows. The cure is not moral surgery, but integration. The transcendent self does not deny Hyde. It sees him as Dr. Jekyll's shadow self, and it blesses him while choosing not to bow to him. This is how it transfigures our shadow energy into its higher form of expression. The Apostle Paul wrestled with the same paradox in Romans 7:19. "For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing." Yet even Paul understood that the struggle itself is not failure, it is the field of grace. Perfectionism despises that struggle. Transcendence reveres it. Grace moves through the tension between good and evil, not the elimination of one by the other. Perfectionism seeks to build towers of Babel, monuments to human righteousness that scrape the edge of heaven but never enter it. Transcendence kneels. It knows that the kingdom of heaven is not built upward, but inward. As the Gospel of Thomas records, Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you, and it is outside you." The perfectionist searches for a ladder to heaven. The transcendent opens the door inside the heart. To live from your transcendent self is to realize that awareness is higher even than the content of awareness. You can watch your anger without being angry, your fear without being afraid, your pride without being proud. You can see the perfectionist voice rise up, the one that says, "Be flawless, be right, be pure," and smile, knowing it is just another thought. Awareness turns the sword of judgment into a mirror. As the Bhagavad Gita says, "He who sees inaction in action and action in inaction, he is wise among men." True transcendence acts without attachment to outcomes, yet with full presence in the moment. Lucifer's counterfeit of transcendence, escapism, has many names: bliss chasing, spiritual tourism, ascension obsession. It tempts you to rise above pain without learning from it, to abandon the body instead of sanctifying it. It offers heaven without incarnation, light without heat, knowledge without compassion. But transcendence is not an out-of-body experience. It is a full-body surrender. It doesn't lift you away from the material world. It lifts you high enough to see it clearly and serve it wisely. Escapism transcends to avoid suffering. Transcendence rises to transform it. The book of Ecclesiastes says, "Do not be overly righteous, nor make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself?" Ecclesiastes 7:16. This is the ancient warning against perfectionism. Wisdom becomes folly when it ceases to be human. The Buddha made the same discovery under the Bodhi tree, that neither indulgence nor self-mortification leads to awakening, but the middle way. The transcendent self walks that middle way through every polarity, between good and evil, joy and sorrow, self and other, heaven and earth. When you live from the transcendent self, you no longer see the world in terms of opposites to be conquered, but of frequencies to be harmonized. You recognize that your darkness is not the absence of light, but the womb in which light is born. You understand that chaos is not the enemy of order, but its mother. You see that humility is not weakness, but the conduit of divine power. And you understand that to transcend does not mean to escape, but to encompass. As Hermes Trismegistus wrote in the Emerald Tablet, "That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of one thing." The perfectionist tries to abolish the below. The transcendent reconciles it with the above. In that reconciliation, miracles occur. True transcendence is the ultimate act of humility. It is to stand at the highest peak and realize you are not the mountain. It is to see that your enlightenment, your insight, your virtue, your understanding, all of it is borrowed light. It passes through you, but it is not yours to own. As Meister Eckhart said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." The transcendent self lives from that single eye. It looks upon the world with neither condemnation nor comparison, but with the quiet knowing that all things are returning home to the One. This is the divine right to transcendence, not a license to escape reality, but to perceive it from above the storm and to act within it as a vessel of peace. The perfectionist builds walls to keep the storm out. The transcendent self stands in the rain and learns to dance. New subheader: The Transcendent Self in Relationships. The transcendent self is the quiet summit where clarity and compassion replace control and codependence. It is the awareness in you that no longer seeks to win, fix, or prove, but to see. When this self wakes inside a relationship, the need to be right dissolves into the will to be real. You begin to sense that every connection, romantic, familial, or spiritual, is a field of divine vibration, alive with frequencies that rise and fall together. The transcendent self listens to those frequencies without trying to control their pitch. It allows harmony to emerge from dissonance and meaning to unfold from mystery. Most relationships struggle beneath the weight of perfectionism, the demand that love should feel pure, clear, and certain at all times. But love is not static. It moves in waves. The perfectionist clings to the crest of the wave, desperate to freeze the feeling of light. The transcendent self rides the motion, knowing that dissent is part of ascent and silence part of song. It recognizes that misunderstanding is not the enemy of union, but its compost, the darkness in which compassion grows. When this self is present, you stop trying to polish the people you love into better reflections of your ideals. You begin to see them as mirrors of your own unfinished wholeness. You can hold the tension of contradiction, the sacred mess of being human, without turning it into a problem to solve. You no longer divide moments into sacred and profane, success and failure, intimacy and distance. You simply witness the vibration that runs through them all. This is humility in motion. The awareness that your partner's shadow, your friend's flaw, your own fear, all are notes in the same divine chord. The transcendent self brings calm where the ego demands clarity. It speaks less and listens deeper. It watches the conversation between souls that takes place beneath the one between mouths. It can feel when the tone of a sentence carries love and when it carries pride, when silence is peace and when it is punishment. It knows the difference between withdrawing and returning to center. It does not rush to fix disharmony. It holds space until truth tunes the room. In this awareness, forgiveness ceases to be a performance. You no longer forgive because you should, or withhold forgiveness to preserve superiority. You forgive because separation no longer makes sense. You see that the other person's misstep was never outside of you, but part of the shared field both of you are learning to conduct. Pride wants to be the conductor. Transcendence lets the music lead. The perfectionist in relationship wants symmetry, equal affection, equal effort, equal growth. The transcendent self seeks resonance. It understands that love breathes, it expands and contracts. There will be seasons when one gives more, listens more, stands taller. This is not imbalance but rhythm. Harmony is not achieved by forcing equal volume from every instrument. It is found when each plays in time with the one who wrote the song. When the transcendent self governs, you stop treating love as a project and begin to live it as a practice. You no longer demand that your partner embody God. You look for God moving through your partner. You no longer confuse agreement with intimacy. You learn that true connection does not always mean alignment. It means attunement. Attunement empowers two distinct notes to create one vibration. It is what turns argument into refinement and disappointment into depth. This self dissolves the illusion of hierarchy. You realize that no one is above or below in love. There are only different frequencies of the same divine current. To transcend is to see your beloved as another expression of God learning to recognize himself. Even in conflict, you can sense that a higher intelligence is guiding both of you toward truth. You can disagree without departing. You can hold your ground without closing your heart. The shadow of this self is spiritual superiority, the subtle pride that hides inside purity. It whispers, I am beyond this argument, above this need. But that is Lucifer's perfectionism in a new disguise. The true transcendent self kneels. It admits, I am not above the lesson, I am inside it. It remembers that awareness without compassion becomes arrogance, and insight without humility becomes isolation. It refuses to hide behind enlightenment as an excuse to avoid intimacy. It knows that the highest awareness is useless unless it translates into kindness. When both people live from this self, conversation becomes a form of prayer. Each word vibrates with intention, each silence with presence. You begin to feel that something larger than both of you is speaking through the space between you, the same intelligence that moves galaxies and tides. This is the principle of vibration at work in the field of love. Every touch, every glance, every pause becomes part of the music. Without this self, relationships collapse under the weight of comparison and control. Each person demands perfection and calls it growth. Each confuses critique with wisdom and withdrawal with peace. They worship harmony but fear movement. The transcendent self restores motion. It reminds you that the song of love must be played, not preserved. It turns conflict into cadence and difference into depth. To live from the transcendent self is to let love breathe through you rather than trying to own its breath. It is to watch the glass shatter and still see the light refracted through every shard. It is to stop defending your enlightenment and start embodying grace. It is to realize that transcendence does not lift you out of relationship. It lifts you deeper into it, beyond illusion, beyond pride, beyond perfection, into the living pulse where two souls remember they were never separate to begin with. This is the transcendent self in relationships, the internal humility of awareness made external through love. This harmony between souls turns our connections into sanctuaries for our divine right to love and be loved. New subheader: the transcendent self and the contract of spirit. Spirit is a covenant you honor through integrity. Carry the spark and let it shape how you live. Your mind is not a throne from which you rule over others, and your heart is not a theater in which you perform for approval, not even for God's approval. They are instruments tuned to the frequency of truth. You were not born to flee the world, but to reveal the divine through your human life. This is the seventh of the 7 contracts of incarnation, which says, I will carry a spark of divinity. This covenant calls you to live as a vessel, not a performer. Every thought and action either honors the spark or obscures it. The transcendent self, the ambassador within, keeps this vow. It bridges heaven and earth, time and eternity. It does not need spectacle to prove faith. It measures truth by coherence. Does this choice bring harmony or distortion? Does it lead to humility or pride? The answers reveal whether you are walking in spirit or in illusion. Perfectionism is the enemy of this covenant. It is Lucifer's counterfeit of transcendence, the lie that divinity can be seized through control. Perfectionism freezes the living current of grace, trying to replace relationship with rule. It divides what God has joined, spirit from flesh, light from shadow, and mistakes stillness for sanctity, clarity for completion. Spirit moves through paradox, joining the high and the low, the seen and unseen. The perfectionist fears this movement because they cannot control it. Lucifer's false light offers order without life, purity without love. Lucifer does not tempt with darkness so much as with imitation. He sells purity while hiding pride within it. He whispers, "You can be like God," while meaning you can replace him. That is the seed of perfectionism, the attempt to manufacture holiness instead of participating in it. Transcendence receives light and reflects it. Perfectionism tries to own it. It seeks a sterile peace where nothing offends and no failure humbles. Such peace is lifeless. It is escape disguised as enlightenment. Escapism is the shadow twin of transcendence. Both look upward, but for different reasons. The escapist climbs to avoid suffering. The transcendent rises to redeem it. Escapism seeks anesthesia. Transcendence seeks transformation. Escapism says, I will not feel this. Transcendence says, I will walk through this until it transfigures me. Escapism avoids the imperfections of incarnation. Transcendence embraces and transfigures them. In its quest for purity, perfectionism becomes an escapist in holy robes, denying what is human in order to preserve the illusion of being divine. Perfectionism is not faith. It is fear of vulnerability. It prays, if I am flawless, I will not be hurt. It turns grace into a transaction and holiness into performance. But divinity cannot be earned. It can only be embodied. The moment you grasp at it, it slips through your fingers. Spirit moves through the humble because humility leaves nothing to block its path. This is what Lucifer could never accept. The throne of heaven is reached by bowing, not by climbing. Humility restores vibration. It breaks the paralysis of control and allows spirit to move again. Pride demands purity. Humility allows wholeness. Pride wants to be the source. Humility consents to be the conduit. Pride insists on certainty. Humility learns through faith. The humble remember that God's intelligence flows through what is living, not what is perfect. Humility is not weakness, but correct proportion, the posture that lets heaven and earth meet in one heart. The perfectionist calls humility weakness because it cannot imagine power without domination. True power is authority in service to truth. It does not coerce, it clarifies, it does not perform, it permeates. The humble soul does not broadcast its light, it lives it like gravity. Lucifer's light flashes bright and dies. The light of spirit endures because it flows. This contract calls you to measure truth by its function over time. Pride values appearance, humility values result. Watch what your convictions produce. If they yield patience, generosity, and peace, they are aligned with spirit. If they yield judgment, rigidity, or alienation, they belong to the counterfeit. The law of vibration is the law of transfiguration. When you harmonize with something, you magnify it, and you magnify the part of you that corresponds to it. Perfectionism hides under noble language. It can mimic wisdom, serenity, or detachment, but its vibration is cold. It corrects others without compassion, confuses avoidance with mastery, and preaches purity while breeding division. The transcendent mind refuses to separate the divine from the human, the sacred from the ordinary. It sees revelation in responsibility, holiness in imperfection, and grace in persistence. It does not need to be above life to be aligned with heaven. Lucifer's fall was the first act of spiritual escapism, grasping for light without obedience. Every perfectionist repeats that fall on a smaller scale. In chasing flawlessness, they reject the friction that polishes wisdom. They build towers of intellect and ritual to reach God, but the divine waits below. In the ground they refuse to touch. The transcendent self does not build towers. It builds altars. A tower isolates you from earth. An altar anchors you to it. One reaches, the other receives. One hoards insight, the other offers it back. Pride wears two masks. The first is self-pity, passive pride. It mourns imperfections with theatrical sorrow, secretly worshiping its wounds. The second is self-righteousness, aggressive pride. It defends illusions of superiority with zeal. Envy drives both, flipping the soul between collapse and crusade. When you envy another's light, you forget your own source. You either despair of attaining it or judge them for having it. Both movements feed Lucifer's vibration, division. Humility interrupts this current. It accepts that every light burns with the same flame. Envy works like corrosion. Inward, it dissolves gratitude into grievance. Outward, it turns comparison into contempt. From there, the pendulum swings. When your standards condemn you, you slip into self-pity. When your standards flatter you, you parade into self-righteousness. Both are pride. One proclaims, "I'm too broken to be used." The other, "I'm too right to be wrong." Both center the self and exile grace. The contract of spirit breaks the pendulum by returning you to obedience over image. Do the simple next right thing and let time speak for God. When humility governs, the soul grows steady. You no longer chase spiritual highs or dramatize spiritual lows. You do not measure progress by sensations or visions. You look to the fruits. Have I become kinder, quicker to forgive, slower to judge? Do I repair what I harm? If the answer is yes, the vibration is pure. Do not cling to slogans. Test the function of things over time. This is the spiritual practice of transcendence. Transcendence is not a trance or a flight from pain. It is the clarity to stand inside paradox without collapsing. It lets both joy and sorrow teach, both order and chaos move you toward wisdom. Escapism flees the storm. Transcendence learns to see through it. Escapism ascends to forget. Transcendence ascends to remember. Escapism worships light and denies darkness. Transcendence knows light is meaningful because of it. Escapism edits reality. Transcendence reads its whole text. The perfectionist builds walls to protect an image of divinity. The transcendent opens windows to let divinity breathe. The perfectionist polishes image. The transcendent refines motives. The perfectionist prays to be exalted. The transcendent prays to be useful. The perfectionist sees purity as distance from error. The transcendent sees purity as fidelity to truth. One seeks to appear holy. The other seeks to act justly. To live this contract, refuse theatrics. Make amends where you have done harm. Keep promises without ceremony. Choose the lesser stage and the stricter truth. Honor the quiet disciplines that never trend. Telling the plain truth, paying what you owe, showing up when it is dull, forgiving without applause. These are not glamorous. They are holy. They keep the spark from flickering into self-importance. When the contract of spirit is broken, everything becomes artificial. You study to collect and hoard knowledge instead of seeking wisdom and insight. You recite truths instead of living them. You build altars to your own insight. You confuse intensity with depth, control with devotion. This is the frozen light, radiant but dead. The spark remains, but it suffocates beneath layers of fear and pride. You can feel it in your body, shoulders braced, breath shallow, jaw tight, sentences sharpened to win rather than to bless. Your faith devolves into argument and your worship into display. When the contract of spirit is honored, the world grows intelligible again. You sense the sacred in ordinary tasks, the divine pattern hidden in daily motions. You no longer chase experiences to feel connected. You live as connection itself. The signal that once seemed distant becomes steady and quiet. You begin to see how truth reveals itself in motion. Confession clears interference. Forgiveness restores tone. Gratitude amplifies strength. Honesty purifies intent. The room sounds different, as if a constant hum has resolved into music. Lucifer cannot counterfeit that awareness because it carries no vanity. It does not seek to dazzle. It moves through contradiction without breaking. Humility turns light into warmth. It makes knowledge useful, power merciful, and freedom responsible. When this current runs through you, the mind stops arguing with reality. You act not to prove holiness, but because holiness has taken root. You do the next right thing because it is right, not because anyone will see. You will still hear the whisper of perfectionism. It will say transcendence requires withdrawal, that to be divine is to be untouched. But transcendence is not withdrawal. It is engagement without entanglement. It touches the world without losing the signal of heaven. It remembers the difference between separation and consecration. It keeps company with the imperfect without endorsing what destroys. It stays in the conversation long enough to redeem it. It also knows when to walk away and let someone continue on their path until they're ready to hear what you have to say. This is how you can tell the difference between transcendence and escapism in your own life. Escapism avoids responsibility. Transcendence increases it. After a true encounter with God, you owe more to the people around you, not less. You become easier to correct and harder to offend. You repent faster. You repair without being prompted. You take smaller credit and bear larger cost. These are fruits time can count. If you want a practical compass, anchor it here. Obedience over image. Where image polishes, obedience obeys. Image asks, how will this look? Obedience asks, what is required of me? Image performs holiness. Obedience practices it. Image builds a brand. Obedience builds a life. Keep choosing obedience, and your life will develop weight. Weight steadies the soul against the winds of perfectionism. Do not mistake quiet for apathy. The soul that keeps this contract grows quiet because it has fewer arguments to sustain. It is not numb, it is grounded. It does not need to dramatize conviction to live it. It has learned that fire burns hotter when it is banked, that lamps give steadier light when they are trimmed. This is what the old writers meant by meekness, controlled strength at the service of good. You will fail at this. Expect it. Failure does not annul the contract, it activates it. The moment you see the miss, agree with the truth, return to humility, and do the next right thing. Let the correction be swift and the explanation brief. When you fall forward toward the person you wronged, toward the promise you broke, toward the work you avoided. Grace is not sentimental, it is structural. It rebuilds the bridge as soon as you step back onto it. And when you succeed, do not build a monument. Success is not a shrine, it is a stewardship. Let your victories become doorways for others. Pass on what refined you. Share tools, not thrones. The spark multiplies when you refuse to make it personal glory. The greatest proof of transcendence is not mystical language, but durable goodness, the way your life keeps its promises when the room is empty. I once believed transcendence meant being untouchable, hovering above the struggle. I mistook stillness for peace and purity for truth. Now I know that transcendence walks through fire and comes out light, not because it avoided the flames, but because it let them refine what was false. I bow to what is, and I let God work where I cannot. Be a temple, not a tower. Let the spark you carry find breath in your imperfections, through your words, your labor, your forgiveness. Let it govern how you spend, how you speak, how you repair. Prove the divine, not with spectacle, but with steadiness. This is the vow of the transcendent self, to bear the flame of spirit without fleeing the world, to be human and holy, and to love what God has made until it shines. New subheader, the transcendent self and the principle of vibration. When I was a boy, I used to lie flat on my bedroom floor with the radio turned low, listening to a song by the band Survivor called "It's the Singer, Not the Song." I didn't understand the message then, but it hooked into me. The opening line, "It's just another summer, you hear a different drummer," felt like it was pointing at a secret I couldn't name. I didn't have language for what I felt in that lyric. I just knew that it felt more real than anything I was hearing in church or school. Years later, after decades of selling, speaking, and coaching entrepreneurs, another line in that song came back to me. When it's coming from the heart, all the people sing along. It's the man behind the music, it's the singer, not the song. That's the principle of vibration in one verse. The magic is never just in the song, it's in the person singing it. The same words, the same melody, the same chords, but a completely different impact, depending on who carries them. The singer's presence is the real message. Their state is the sermon. Their being is the signal. You felt this difference from people, and in their responses to you, two people say the same sentence. One barely registers, the other goes straight through your defenses and rearranges the furniture in your heart. The difference isn't in their vocabulary, it isn't even their intelligence. It's in the vibration of their presence, the quality of consciousness moving through the words. Every craft eventually reveals this law. At the beginning, outcomes are sorted by obvious factors. Who practices, who studies, who shows up on time. Effort and skill separate the amateurs from the competent. But if you keep climbing, music, martial arts, business, ministry, medicine, you reach a plateau where everyone is talented, everyone is disciplined, everyone knows the tactics. From there, the gap in results stops being logical. Two people with similar intelligence, training, and work ethic produce wildly different impact. One slowly advances, the other bends history. You see this law at work everywhere. Two spiritual teachers saying almost the same things. One leaves people mildly satisfied, the other leaves them clearer, braver, and more honest. Two doctors with the same credentials. Under one, patients feel processed. Under the other, they feel cared for. Two salespeople on the same team selling the same product with the same script. One survives, the other shatters records. The difference is not in the script, it is in the state. It is the quality of presence that moves through the person. Economists call part of this the winner takes most or power law effect, where a tiny percentage of people capture most of the rewards while thousands of equally qualified peers barely make a dent. We attribute this to marketing, timing, or even luck. Those matter, but underneath them is a subtler law. the inner order of a person's being, the way their nervous system holds conviction, humility, and possibility. Vibration is not a New Age buzzword. It is the real-time pattern of your inner life made visible. It is the way your thoughts, emotions, body, and behavior are or aren't in harmony. When your heart and mind fall into coherence, when what you believe, what you say, and how you move through the world stop arguing with each other, people feel it before they understand it. They might not know why they trust you more, but they do. They might not know why they suddenly feel braver or more honest around you, but they do. That is what I mean when I say transcendence is a qualitative change, not a categorical one. Perfectionism dreams in black and white categories. It longs for the day when you never feel fear, never feel doubt, never miss a step, some imaginary state where spiritual life is one continuous highlight reel. Transcendence does not erase fear or doubt. It changes your relationship to them. It sends the same body into the same office, the same marriage, the same conversations, but with a different presence and radically different results. The friction in the relationship doesn't vanish. The way you vibrate inside the friction does change, and that changes everything. That inner shift is not cosmetic. Over time, it alters the cast of your life. Different opportunities recognize you. Different people are drawn to you. Old obstacles fall away because they no longer resonate with who you are. You haven't escaped your humanity. You've stopped worshiping your fractures. The transcendent self is the part of you that has remembered who you are above the noise and holds that remembering until reality starts reorganizing around it. Think of it this way. At lower levels, people chase quantitative change. More tactics, more content, more hours, more noise. At higher levels, the shift is qualitative, not how much you do, but how you do it. A $4 purse and a $4,000 purse both carry your keys. Functionally, they do the same job. The difference is in the unseen qualities, the material, the stitching, the feel in your hand, the longevity, the subtle impression of excellence. So it is with vibration. Many can copy your behavior, few can match your being. I saw this long before I had language for it. Early in my sales career, I watched the motivational speaker Zig Ziglar. Nothing he said from that stage was radically new. I had already read his books. My manager repeated the same principles every week. But something passed across that room that no book or manager had carried. For months afterward, my effort, courage, and even my joy in selling operated on a different level. Same territory, same product, same basic process. On paper, nothing had changed, but I had changed, or rather, my state had been tuned by exposure to a man whose inner life was ordered around increase. What moved me was not information, it was transmission. That is the transcendent principle of vibration. It's the click your soul hears when someone's inner world lines up with what they're saying. It is the relief you feel in the presence of someone who is not pretending to be more spiritual, more certain, or more above it all than they actually are. Their coherence gives your own coherence permission to wake up. This is one of the signatures of transcendence. When you leave a truly transcendent person, you don't just think they're amazing. You feel something truer in me just stood up. Their light doesn't make you smaller, it makes you more yourself. The principle of vibration says that everything moves, everything vibrates, and everything seeks resonance with what it matches. Two pendulums on the same beam eventually synchronize. Fireflies flash in unison. Neurons in the brain fire in rhythmic patterns to form a single thought. These are not just interesting facts of science, they are metaphors of spirit. Wherever a coherent signal appears, everything nearby starts to organize around it. In a band, one musician who is locked into the tempo can pull the entire group into time. In a room, one person who is calm, clear, and surrendered becomes a tuning fork. Without uttering a word, they change the room, just by being there. This is the role of your transcendent self. It is the tuning fork inside you. When this self is awake, you no longer obsess over controlling everything outside you. You focus on tuning what is within you. You let God have his rightful place in the center of your being, and you let everything else fall into orbit around that center. Your value stops depending on whether the song is a hit. Your gifts and your calling come to life, and others take notice and respond. Humility is the posture that makes this possible. Humility is how you keep your vibration coherent, how you stay clear enough inside for the note of spirit to ring true. Humility is not self-hatred or self-deprecation. It is transparency. It is the state of being so honest, so undefended, that light can pass through you without distortion. Pride, by contrast, thickens the glass. It densifies consciousness until the current slows and the song falters. Pride wants to be the source. Humility consents to be the instrument. God speaks this paradox clearly in Isaiah 57:15. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit. Transcendence is when high and holy part of you meets the low and humble side of you. The altitude of God meets the attitude of surrender. That intersection is the vibration of grace. It is what you feel when you enter a room where someone is genuinely transcendent. The air feels lighter. The noise inside your own head gets quieter. You haven't been hypnotized. You've been activated. Their humility has removed the static from the line, leaving only the signal of your true voice. Pride chases elevation without embodiment. It wants to ascend without integrating anything messy, human, or unfinished. It dreams of a spirituality where you never sweat, never weep, never wrestle. Perfectionism is pride's favorite disguise. It doesn't just want you to grow. It wants you to glow in a way that convinces everyone, including you, that you're above the lesson. Transcendence walks a different path. It does not flee the noise. It listens for the note beneath it. Where perfectionism tries to freeze life into a flawless still frame, transcendence moves. It walks into the same conflict, the same temptation, the same limitation with a different tone. It doesn't ignore dissonance. It hears it as an invitation to return to resonance. Transcendence does not say, if I were truly spiritual, I wouldn't feel this. It says, because I am aligned with spirit, I will let this feeling be instructed, not obeyed. The Apostle Paul describes the highest example of this vibration in Philippians 2:6-7 when he writes of Jesus Christ. Though he was in the form of God, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. This emptying and kenosis is perfect vibration, power without resistance, divinity moving through humanity without friction. The more Jesus surrendered, the clearer his tone. He did not grasp at godhood. He revealed it by becoming transparent to the Father's will. The self-emptying is the ultimate qualitative shift in being, where divinity and humanity vibrate in perfect resonance with no resistance between them. This is the pattern of the transcendent self. It doesn't strain to be divine. It empties what is false so divinity can flow. To live by the principle of vibration, you must begin to measure truth not merely by creed, but by tone. Do your convictions actually produce patience, courage, kindness, and clarity over time? Then their vibration is aligned. Do they produce anxiety, harshness, superiority, or paralysis? Then something in the signal is off, no matter how correct the doctrine sounds. This is where transcendence departs sharply from perfectionism. Perfectionism is simply pride trying to control your vibration, to manufacture holiness by tightening instead of tuning. Perfectionism obsesses over image, asking, do I sound spiritual? Do I look enlightened? Do I appear consistent? Transcendence seeks transparency, asking, does my inner life match what my mouth is saying? Does my private conduct resonate with my public claims? Does my body believe the prayers that my lips are praying? When the transcendent self governs, Thought, word, and deed start to move at the same tempo. You stop making promises you can't keep. You begin to speak from places you've actually gone, not from ideas you're pushing in hopes to win approval or status. Your yes carries weight because your being is already leaning in that direction. Your no is clean because it isn't laced with fear or resentment. You've met people like this, a leader, a mentor, a friend who doesn't say much, but when they speak, the room shifts. When they apologize, you feel the sincerity in your bones. When they challenge you, you don't feel condemned. You feel summoned. Their presence doesn't press on your nervous system. It gives your nervous system more room. The revelation comes when you realize that what you felt in their presence was not borrowed holiness. It was your own God-given frequency being invited to rise. Their transcendence didn't erase your humanity. It dignified it. That's how you know it was real. Lucifer's counterfeit always leaves you more dependent on the guru or the system. True transcendence leaves you more dependent on God. The perfectionist ascends to avoid the noise of the world. The transcendent rises high enough to hear the harmony hidden inside it. The escapist climbs out of fear, looking for the highest possible vantage where nothing can touch them. The transcendent moves out of love, willing to stand in the storm if that's where grace is needed. Perfectionism wants the silence of avoidance. Transcendence finds the silence inside sound. Perfectionism misuses the principle of vibration by trying to shut resonance down altogether, instead of tuning your inner frequency while the world still hums around you. When you live from the transcendent self, life does not suddenly become peaceful on the outside, but something in you becomes strangely still and strangely strong. You can sit in a difficult conversation and feel the hum of spirit under the words. You can walk into a chaotic environment and feel the tempo of heaven in your chest. Your instinct stops being, how do I get out of this, and becomes, how do I stay in tune while I'm here? To transcend is to become transparent. It is to live so open that even pain can be turned into music, so honest that even failure hums with purpose. The perfectionist seeks a frozen heaven, a realm where nothing ever goes wrong and nothing ever needs to be redeemed. The transcendent discovers heaven moving through imperfection, redeeming what pride would rather discard. Grace is not an escape from gravity. It is gravity transfigured, pulling everything, your gifts, your wounds, your history, toward coherence. This is the hidden music of the principle of vibration, the way God's movement keeps drawing every discordant note in your life toward harmony. As this realization roots in you, life grows quieter, but not dull. You talk less and listen more. Your words grow fewer and heavier. Attention deepens. You start to notice the subtle rhythm running through every encounter, the pause before you react, the softening in someone's eyes when they feel seen, the way a room feels different when you choose honesty over performance. You stop needing to convince people that you've transcended anything. You let the tone of your life speak. The principle of vibration is how transcendence moves through matter. It is the music of God expressed as time, breath, and choice. Spirit is not asking you to be flawless. It is asking you to be faithful and to stay in tune. You will drift. Expect it. The question is not whether you will fall out of resonance. The question is how quickly you will notice the static, return to humility, and realign. Every time you do, your frequency strengthens. Your life starts to sound less like scattered noise and more like a single clear note. And as that note steadies, through your work, your relationships, your conflicts, your forgiveness, something miraculous happens. Others turn to you, not because you force them, not because you perfected yourself, but because you chose to become an instrument instead of an idol. Perfection builds towers to display its light. Transcendence becomes a lamp that quietly brightens every room it enters. It challenges you to stay humble and transparent, to follow the sound of your own drummer, and to become the singer that brings magic to the music.
End of Chapter 11, Part 1 of Awaken Your Shadow by Seth Cherapak.